I've been looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, and I literally am holding that book, the 80s book. You can probably hear me slapping at it right now. I got it here in the studio. And as I was saying the email that I had sent over, actually, I think to Premier Networks, that the 80s are going to be the one that I'm more drawn towards. And I remember reading the preface about the 70s meaning more, and I've got it up here right now. And then you said, like, at some point you figured, well, maybe probably should do an 80s book. It's been over a decade since that book came out. I'll ask in a broad sense. What feedback, what reaction have you gotten from people who've bought one or both the AT-4070s and the AT-4080s books?
Well, feedback is probably about equal, because there are those that enjoy the 70s programs and use the 70s book as reference material. And then, of course, there are those that enjoy the 80s shows and use the 80s book for reference. Now, personally, I think the 80s book is a little bit better, and that's only because I learned a lot of things when I first published the 70s book. And the 80s book, I think, is probably at least 100 pages longer, because there's more content, even though I only covered about 8 years of the 80s, while the 70s book covers all 10 years. But I learned a lot of things when I did the 70s book, and so I wanted to do a little bit more to enhance the 80s book. And I think the 80s book actually is the better of the two, because there's more in-depth, there's more people involved, there's more background from some of the key people that worked with Casey, and more material that I was able to access, more listeners I was able to request information, testimonials from, and so it was a learning experience after I did the 70s, and I really wanted to enhance the 80s book to make it a little bit better. And again, personally, I think the 80s book is a better product.
There's that picture in that preface and introduction from 1981, and I know there's a few stories floating around YouTube talking about when Casey Kasem came to visit you in the 1990s and such. But how did that photo op meeting? You were there. How did that come about in the summer of '81?
Well, I was a regular reader of Billboard magazine, and Billboard that summer was sponsoring a radio programming forum in Chicago, and this was, of course, for radio stations from coast to coast. Well, I was originally from the Chicago area, and when I saw that, I thought I was actually a student in college at the time, and they offered a student discount to go to this radio programming forum, which was the only time I ever attended one of those. And when I went there, I was picking up a lot of material, promotion material, types of things about from different radio stations and different things. But then I found out that Watermark, which was the parent company of Casey's American Top 40, actually had a booth there, and actually a suite. And so when I went to the booth and I picked up some materials about American Top 40, they said, well, we have a suite as well, and Casey's here today if you want to go up there. And since I was participating in the forum, I was eligible to go, and I went up to the suite, and it was just a lot of people there, a lot of radio people, and Casey was there, and someone was there with a Polaroid camera, and they said, would you like to meet Casey? And it's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I mean, he's only been a part of my life for like the last 10 years, because I was strictly a fan, and I continue to be, but it was quite an experience when I was able to meet him face to face for the first time. And the photo in that book was actually the photo taken in the Watermark suite.
Of all the assorted paraphernalia that's included, the assorted letters, I mean, this is like a broad question. I'd see if you can narrow this down off the top of your head. But of all of those, like I said, letters, the promotional magazine adverts and such like that, Is there one that is like the most either rare or special? You went, wow, you may not know this, folks, if you're reading this, but this is like the most precious one in there. Is there one you're particularly proud you were able to get into the book?
Yes, the illustration pieces is how I refer to those. There's memos and record surveys and ads, as you mentioned. But the one, actually, it's a kind of there were more than one, but the time period was John Lennon's assassination. And in the book, there are a number of documents that I was able to pull together in order to point out the extraordinary lengths that the Watermark staff went to re-record the program that captured the time when John Lennon was assassinated. And they had actually recorded the show, which contained the song Just Like Starting Over. He was like in the top 5 at that point. And they had recorded the show and shipped it off to radio stations. And there were like 500 radio stations that subscribed to the show at the time. But when news broke about Lennon's death, the staff of American Top 40 got back together, and this was a very late, I think it was a Monday night. The staff got together, they re-scripted Casey's introduction to that particular song, recorded it, and the next day shipped it out to about 500 radio stations with details about what they did to update it, to make it relevant for that particular weekend. And the documents that I have in my book, I don't remember how many, but there are a number of pages that I used to actually capture that story and that part of American Top 40 history. And I think that's one of the most important parts of that book, because it really does give inside information not only to the radio station, but what actually happened at Watermark.
Oh, because the show was recorded, and I was at a well, maybe you can give a little bit more insight on this, but the day that they recorded the show compared to when it would actually air was a ways in advance. I'm sure to the person listening at home is like, wow, that must be Casey Kasem. Like, maybe for all they know, in the studio right now here in. Well, of course not. I mean, it's in Hollywood. It's well in advance. About how long in advance was it? Was it like a Wednesday or Thursday of the week before the airing? Did I have that? When was that they would typically record?
They recorded it about 10 days in advance, so it would be Wednesday prior to the following Saturday.
Okay.
So, and Casey went into the studio, everything was scripted, and he recorded the voice tracks for the show. On Thursday, they mixed it with the music, and then they sent that off to a company that actually put the entire program on vinyl records and packaged it up. Each week it went out to a radio station in a box set of 4 albums. And the radio stations got the album set, the box of 4 albums, with Casey's introduction on, throughout the program. The entire program was complete with that box set. And radio stations would actually get those usually about the Wednesday before broadcast. So it was recorded on a Wednesday, and a week later the radio stations would be about that time they would be receiving the show. And so the John Lennon program would have been recorded the Wednesday before he died, and then it would have been shipped out either that Friday or Saturday, a couple days later. And then again, this happened on Monday, so they really went to all out in order to bring the news of John Lennon to American Top 40 for that particular week. And it's just an incredible story, and obviously it would take someone of John Lennon's fame in order for them to do something like that.
Right. I suppose you could say it's also, I guess, fortuitous in a way that outside of maybe the death of Elvis Presley, but even though he had singles that were occasionally making the top 40, you didn't have too many instances of a big act, high profile in the charts, happening within that week and a half period where you had to adjust by chance, and then they happen to pull it off for this. But it's I guess it's fortunate that did not happen more frequently.
Well, that's right. And of course, John Lennon just had released, he was back again on the music scene with a new album and a new 45. And so, he hadn't been releasing records for a while. So, I mean, this was really a tragic event.
All right. Now we're getting more into your personal favorites of the, I'll maybe narrow it down, 70s shows and 80s shows. Do you have a particular favorite episode from any decade, or maybe even a particular, as Casey likes to put it, and I see this on the AT40 fan boards online too, the Casey eras, the disco Casey and voiceover Casey and all that. Do you have a particular favorite show and or a particular favorite era of his approach to doing AT40?
Well, I have to, if you're going to ask me on a personal level, I have to go back to the days when I was a teenager, and then that would have been the early 70s. And the 1971 shows, I was just gaga over the music at that point in time. And you can't put on a 1971 show for me, and I can't find any fault in any of those shows. I love the music from 40 to number one, and just that time period. I really enjoyed the 70, 71, 72, 73 is when I actually graduated from high school. So, it's just any adolescent can kind of point out the era of that time period in life that you enjoy music, and I think that corresponds to most people.
What was maybe, I'll put it this way, not necessarily favorite, but when do you think the show, from your perspective as a listener, was the most, not necessarily professionally done, because it was always professionally done to some degree or another, depending on management, but when do you think they had everything just right between flow, his delivery, facts, the particular jingle package, all of that, maybe without regard to the music, because you could have a great show and it happens to be the doldrums of top 40 music at a given time, or vice versa. When was American Top 40 in that era maybe the best between 70 and 88?
I would say that they struggled with trying to find radio stations on major markets from the beginning. But I would say by the time 1975, 1976 rolls around, they were found on almost every major market station. And I think at that point, they were really running on all cylinders. The show was polished. Casey had been hosting it for about 5 or 6 years. They had a routine. They had built a solid listening audience for many markets, and I think they just built from there. And it became, I think, Casey became a household name probably by the late 70s. Of course, the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack just rewrote the charts in 1977, 78, and I think that reinforced Casey as a host of the weekly Top 40. So I'd say that started about 75, 76, and by 1980, the show I think was heard on more than 500 radio stations. And so, I think when you go back and look at July 1970, it started on either 7 or 8 radio stations, something like that. 10 years later, they're on 500 stations. I think, that's incredible and for a syndicated radio show. And that just goes to the testament of the staff of American Top 40, as well as Casey as a master storyteller. So, just the growth of the show during the 70s is really phenomenal. It's just a great story.
And he changed, again, his voice inflection. He changed his delivery style as time went along. Again, like I mentioned, the disco Casey, you can listen to those shows from 1979, and his energy is right up there with like the constant beat that was happening about every other song, it seemed, and then suddenly, whoop, it's almost like Wile E. Coyote going up and over the cliff, and then the disco ends. He's still kind of bringing that style into 1980, and then whoop, throttles back. And that's just one example, obviously, of all the styles. When maybe the funniest part of the book, and I mean funny in a good way, was when he's in the thing that you included from him, his letter, where he said Matt Wilson pointed out the different cases, and then he goes right into it and breaks it all down. Did you expect Casey Kasem to acknowledge that, yeah, you know what, I had all these different styles that all these other listeners have noticed, that he went, yep, I did?
Well, I think many people in radio, as well as many listeners, would have been able to identify that. But you're right, for Casey to actually document that, and that's a really, I think, a really important part to the book, part of the introduction, is Casey's description of the 5 different Caseys, his 5 different voice styles. That is really a key part of the book as far as understanding the various changes that he went through during the years of American Top 40. And you know what, to be honest, I would guess almost any radio personality might have gone through those kind of stages as well. But to have Casey document that, I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Looking through the assorted dates and the breakdowns of the shows, and I'm going through like 1983 I have right now. Just by chance, I just opened that up. So how did you determine what to include as you're doing your recaps of like odd chart stats, stories, portions played, and what to leave out in your summaries?
Well, I think it's safe to say that every American Top 40 show has its own unique elements, and that being, Casey rarely told the same story more than once. Now, that did happen, but not from week to week. And so each program had a different set of stories that Casey told, and so I tried to document each one of those as part of the profile for each particular program. And so that was one thing that was different about each show, the fact that he answered listener questions about chart trivia and things along those lines. Each one of those letter questions that he read were different, and of course every long distance dedication letter was different, and a request for a different song. And there were also different aspects about, maybe he made a mistake here or there, or maybe he promoted an upcoming special. If he played part of a song that was part of a story, I thought that was kind of important to, just in case. And again, this book is, I think, a great point of reference. If someone was thinking, there was a show once where Casey played a song by Queen, and maybe it was, or actually I think it was, what was a song by the Sex Pistols? What was it? I don't remember offhand, but
Anarchy in the UK, or God Save the Queen, or one of those.
Yeah, exactly. He played a portion of that in one show, and if somebody was thinking, there was a show where he played a part of a Sex Pistols song, that's documented in the book. And so again, every program has its own type of profile, so to speak, and so I thought it was interesting enough to include all of this information that helped make it different from every other show.
You're one of the names that gets listed at the end of all of the, for those that listen on the radio, for the syndicated version on Premier Radio Networks, and Larry Morgan reads off the list of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, Pete Battistini, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. How did you get either contacted or connected, going way back to when Premier started to syndicate, or whatever, I can't remember what the company was back, but when the syndication began, did they reach out to you? Like, how did that get to the point where they went, you know what, we need to give some credit to Pete for the contributions to get the facts for this, for the replays?
Well, I knew Casey fairly well, and when they started going into the vaults in order to pull out the old shows, they were finding that some of the shows were not there. The master tapes were not there. And Casey referred them to me because he knew that I had a vinyl copy of every show. And so that was one of the things that I was able to do. I loaned them a few copies of the shows that I had collected over the years. And of course they sent them back to me once they made copies. But I think that was one thing that in a way was appreciated by Premier. And of course I've done considerable efforts in order to promote Casey and American Top 40 just by getting the word out about my books. And I think that kind of works hand in hand and helps enhance the radio broadcasts every week, which have been going on now, I believe, like 15 years with the 70s show, and maybe, 10 or 12 years with the 80s show. So I think they find value in the fact that I've been able to help promote American Top 40. And so I was fortunate enough to have them add my name to the closing credits every week.
And one of those other names, I should note, actually worked in this building where I'm at right now, Rob Durkee.
Right.
Yeah, at WAYY Radio, which is one of our sister stations now. We've had consolidation over time. But in the 1980s, I think it was long before I worked here, Robin Scott, I think was his radio name. But he worked here in Eau Claire at WAYY Radio when that used to be a music station. It's now a sports talk station before he went over to work at American Top 40. So every time we play it on our station on Greatest Hits 98.1, there's a little Eau Claire connection there on every single airing of the show. And there's still a few people in this building who will occasionally email him, or I'll get an email from one of his coworkers that forwards stuff along all the time. I've never talked to him, I don't believe, but there is a connection back to this maybe even this room I'm sitting in right now, talking to you right now, to the history of American Top 40.
That's amazing. Yeah, I try to keep in touch with Rob, so that's great that you've maintained that memory about him there. Yeah,
it's really cool that it all kind of comes around full circle and everything, and I know that our listener feedback, as much as one can get nowadays, I know people really love listening to the show. So we air them Saturdays and Sundays, 7 to 10 or 6 to 10, depending on which show and the length of the show, et cetera, et cetera. But the feedback's really good. So we're giving away the mugs right now. So one of the last questions for you, how did you come up with the idea of doing mugs?
Well, I went to a high school reunion last year, and there were some commemorative mugs made for some of the key people on the planning committee, and I put in the back of my mind it would be kind of nice to have a mug with Casey's picture on it, like a commemorative mug for American Top 40. And sometime earlier this year, I thought, well, you know what? Why don't I try to use this idea and showcase my books as well as Casey? And so I contacted Premier earlier this year, and they liked the idea. And so they put me in touch with a number of radio stations who were interested in giving away the coffee mugs. And if there was an interview opportunity, which obviously there is here, that was a great thing as well.
Very cool. Well, we're going to put this on our YouTube channel. We're going to put this up on our website and our Facebook page so people can listen a little bit more and get some more insight into the history. And I would encourage anyone to, of course, get the book, and we'll give information about that later. Pete, thanks for doing what you did and filling in so many of the gaps on this, and practically filling every single one of the gaps on that. Thank you for doing all of that. We'll look forward to, keeping on listening to the shows and following along the Bible of the guide to all things American Top 40. And if you come up with any other giveaways in the future, we'll definitely be interested in that as well.
Hey, can I do one more thing?
Yes, you may.
Can I mention the website of where listeners can buy the book?
Yes, do that.
That's at40book.com. at40book.com. It's got information about each book and a link to the publisher where it can be purchased.
Perfect. All right, so there we go. That's the website. Go there, buy the book, do what I did, get both books. Get the 70s and 80s book in addition. So thank you, Pete Battistini, for chatting today about American Top 40, the Casey Kasem era, and all the best going forward. And happy day before American Top 40 birthday as well, as we record this on July 3rd.
Thanks, Luke.